Before Jesus stepped into his ministry, before the crowds followed him, before miracles unfolded at his command, he was led somewhere unexpected into the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights, alone, fasting, battling hunger, exhaustion, and the relentless temptations of the enemy. Now think about that. The Son of God, the one with all power, all authority, he didn't just appear on the scene fully revealed. He was trained in the wilderness. This is where so many people get it wrong. They think greatness happens in the public eye, in the applause, in the recognition. But God does not train His strongest warriors in comfort. He prepares them in isolation. He refines them in the quiet, in the struggle, in the place where there is no one to lean on except Him. The wilderness wasn't a punishment. It was preparation. The enemy came at Jesus in that moment of weakness, whispering lies, trying to break Him. "Turn these stones into bread," he said, preying on his hunger. "Throw yourself down and let the angels catch you," he mocked, twisting Scripture. "Bow before me and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world," he offered, as if power could be handed out so cheaply. But Jesus didn't fall. Why? Because he knew something the enemy didn't understand. God had already equipped him. Every moment of silence, every hour of prayer, every hidden lesson was training for this battle. He didn't just resist temptation, he conquered it because he was prepared in the unseen. And that's how God trains His people. Not in the easy seasons, not when everything is going well, but in the wilderness. If you feel like you're alone, like you've been led into a season where nothing makes sense, where the enemy is whispering in your ear trying to break you, you're not abandoned. You're being trained. Because when God is about to do something powerful through you, He first takes you through a season of refining. He removes the distractions. He strips away the things that are keeping you comfortable. He lets the enemy press in, not to destroy you, but to strengthen you. Because you cannot walk in divine authority if you have not been tested. Jesus had to walk through it, and so will you. People want anointing without isolation. They want power without preparation. They want victory without the battle. But it doesn't work that way. You don't get to skip the process. You don't get to step into destiny without being developed. If Jesus had to go through it, why do we think we won't? Some of you are in a season right now where God has pulled you back. It feels like everyone else is moving forward, like doors are opening for others while you're stuck waiting. You see others stepping into their calling and you wonder, why not me? But what you don't realize is that God is not withholding anything from you. He's preparing you for something greater. If He released you now without the wilderness, without the testing, without the endurance, you wouldn't be ready. Jesus walked out of that desert with power. He didn't walk out defeated. He didn't walk out weary. He walked out anointed. Luke 4:14 says that after the wilderness, He returned in the power of the Spirit, and that's when His ministry began. Do you see the pattern? The greater the calling, the greater the preparation. The greater the impact, the greater the refining. You are not in a season of being forgotten. You are in a season of being prepared. Every battle you're facing is not a setback, it's a setup. God is allowing the wilderness because He is building something inside of you that cannot be shaken. So don't despise this season. Don't rush through it. Don't try to take shortcuts. The same Spirit that led Jesus into the wilderness was the Spirit that led Him out, stronger, sharper, unstoppable. And that same Spirit is leading you. When you walk out of this season, you won't just be healed. You won't just be restored. You will be anointed for something greater than you ever imagined. Jesus had all authority. He was the Son of God, the Word made flesh, the one through whom all things were created. And yet, He didn't walk around demanding honor. He didn't come down with a sword in His hand, forcing people to obey Him. No, He humbled Himself. He learned obedience, even though He was already the King of Kings. And that should tell us something. If Jesus Himself had to go through a process of obedience, how much more do we? The world teaches that power comes from dominance, from status, from being served. But Jesus showed that true power comes from surrender. When He was a child, He didn't rush ahead of His time. He didn't stand up at 12 years old and declare, "I'm ready now." Even when He amazed the teachers in the temple, He still went home and submitted to His earthly parents. Think about that. The one who had the wisdom of heaven still subjected himself to authority on earth. Why? Because obedience was part of his training. Most people don't want to hear this. They want to go straight to the throne without first learning to serve. But if Jesus spent years preparing in quiet submission before stepping into his purpose, why do we think we can bypass the process? Obedience isn't about weakness, it's about alignment. It's about positioning yourself so that when God says, now is the time, you are ready to move in full authority. There was a moment when Jesus was in the garden praying so intensely that his sweat became like drops of blood. He knew the suffering that was coming. He knew the weight of the cross. And he prayed, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. But not my will, your will be done. That is obedience. Not just following when it's easy, but surrendering when it costs everything. God will always test obedience before he releases greater authority. He is not looking for people who will only follow when they understand the plan. He is looking for those who will say yes before they even know what the next step is. That's why some people never step into their calling. They hesitate. They want all the details, all the assurances, all the answers before they move. But God doesn't work like that. He says, trust me first, obey first, then you will see. Jesus understood this. That's why he washed the feet of his disciples, even the one who would betray him. That's why he healed the very soldiers who came to arrest him. He had the power to stop it all, to call down angels, to demand justice, but he didn't. Because obedience to the Father's plan was greater than any temporary victory, and in the end, it wasn't the nails that held him to the cross, it was obedience. Some people think obedience is just about following rules, about avoiding sin. But it's bigger than that. It's about trust. It's about letting go of your own way, your own timing, your own understanding, and saying, God, whatever you ask, I will do it. Because obedience isn't just about what you're doing, it's about who you are becoming. Jesus didn't just obey in the big moments, he obeyed in the small, hidden ones. He obeyed in the quiet years before his ministry. He obeyed when no one was watching. And that's what prepared him for the weight of his calling. If you can't obey in the little things, how can God trust you with the big things? Some of you are asking God to open doors, to take you higher, to use you in greater ways. And he's saying, can you obey me where you are now? Can you stay faithful even when it feels like no one sees? Can you follow his voice even when it doesn't make sense? Because when God trains a person, he doesn't just train their skills, he trains their heart. And when your heart is fully surrendered, nothing can stop you. Because the moment you truly say, not my will, but yours be done, that's the moment power is released in your life. That's the moment chains break. That's the moment God says, now you're ready. Jesus understood something most people never grasp. He knew that power, real power, doesn't come from status, from influence, or from human strength. It comes from connection. It comes from the source. And that's why no matter how busy he was, no matter how many demands were placed on him, he always made time to pray. Think about that. The Son of God, the one who had heaven's authority at his command, still withdrew to spend time with the Father. Early in the morning, before the crowds came, late at night after the miracles had been performed, before making any major decision, before taking any major step, Jesus prayed. And if he needed to stay connected to the Father, how much more do we? Yet this is where so many people miss it. They want the results without the relationship. They want the power, the anointing, the breakthrough, but they neglect the one thing that sustains it. Jesus didn't just pray as a ritual. He didn't do it because it was a religious duty. He did it because it was his lifeline. It was the very thing that fueled him, that kept him aligned with the will of the Father. There was a time when his disciples came to him and said, Lord, teach us to pray. Now, these were men who had grown up in a religious culture. They knew the prayers of their people, but they saw something different in Jesus. They saw that when he prayed, things shifted. When he prayed, the atmosphere changed. They saw him walk on water, heal the sick, raise the dead, and they understood that all of it was connected to the way he prayed, because prayer is not just asking for things. It's not just a backup plan when everything else fails. It is where battles are won before they are even fought. It is where clarity comes before decisions are made. It is where strength is renewed before challenges arise. Look at what happened before Jesus chose the 12 disciples. He didn't just pick them at random. He didn't just rely on what made sense on paper. The Bible says he spent the entire night in prayer. He sought the Father before he made his move. And that's why he could walk in confidence, knowing he had chosen exactly who was meant to walk with him, even Judas, the one who would betray him. Some people struggle with direction. They don't know what to do next. They don't know where they're supposed to go. They don't know what decisions to make. But the question is, have you prayed? Have you really prayed? Not just throwing up a quick request, not just going through the motions, but truly seeking God the way Jesus did. Because if Jesus needed prayer to sustain his mission, how can we expect to walk in power without it? How can we expect to have clarity, wisdom, and discernment when we don't even take time to listen? Even in his darkest moment, Jesus turned to prayer. In the garden, knowing the suffering that was ahead, knowing the pain that was coming, he didn't complain. He didn't look for a way out. He fell to his knees and poured his heart out to the Father. And because he had already built a foundation of prayer, because he had already developed that relationship, he was able to say, not my will, but yours be done. That is where real strength is born. Not in public victories, but in private surrender. Not in the moments when people are watching, but in the moments when it's just you and God. And this is why the enemy will do everything he can to keep you from praying. He will fill your mind with distractions. He will make you believe you're too busy, that it doesn't really matter, that you can handle things on your own, because he knows that the moment you truly begin to seek God, the moment you make prayer your priority, nothing will be able to stop you. Jesus didn't just teach his disciples how to preach. He didn't just teach them how to perform miracles. He taught them how to pray, because he knew that everything else flowed from that. And if we want to walk in the same power, in the same authority, in the same divine purpose, we have to do what he did. We have to stay connected to the source, because when you make prayer your foundation, you won't just survive, you will walk in supernatural strength. You won't just get through life, you will move in divine purpose. You won't just hope for victory, you will walk in it every single day. Jesus knew what it meant to face opposition. From the moment he stepped into his calling, resistance followed him. People doubted him, questioned him, accused him. Even in his hometown, where people had seen him grow up, they refused to believe. Isn't this just the carpenter's son, they said? Who does he think he is? They couldn't see the power in him because they were too familiar with his past. And that's how it always is. The moment you start walking in your purpose, opposition will come. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're stepping into something right. The enemy doesn't attack what isn't a threat. If you're facing resistance, it's not a sign to stop, it's confirmation that you're on the right path. Jesus didn't let the opinions of people shake him. He didn't beg for their approval, didn't try to explain himself, didn't waste time convincing those who refused to see. He kept moving, he kept teaching, kept healing, kept fulfilling his mission. Some people loved him, some hated him, but none of it changed who he was. That's the mindset you have to develop. If you are waiting for everyone to support you before you move, you will never take a step. If you're waiting for the road to be easy, you will never reach your destination. Jesus didn't just face opposition from strangers, he faced it from his own disciples. Peter, the one who had walked with him, the one who had seen his miracles, tried to stop him from going to the cross. And what did Jesus say? "Get behind me, Satan." Not because Peter was the enemy, but because the enemy was using him to speak doubt, to bring distraction, to pull him away from the mission. Sometimes opposition comes from the people closest to you, not because they mean harm, but because they don't understand the calling on your life. They see things from a human perspective, but when God has given you an assignment, you can't afford to let human reasoning talk you out of it. You have to be locked in, focused, unshaken. And then there were the Pharisees. The religious leaders, the ones who were supposed to recognize the Messiah, were the very ones who opposed him the most. They challenged him, tested him, plotted against him. Why? Because his presence exposed their emptiness. His power revealed their lack of it. His authority threatened their control. And it's the same today. When you start walking in the power of God, there will always be people who feel threatened. Not because you've done anything to them, but because your presence disrupts their comfort. Jesus didn't waste time arguing with his critics. He didn't lower himself to their level. He stayed on course because he understood that the greatest response to opposition is not words, it's results. You don't have to defend yourself when the fruit of your life speaks for itself. Let people doubt, let them talk, let them misunderstand you. Just keep moving forward. Even on the cross, the opposition didn't stop. They mocked him, ridiculed him, challenged him to save himself, but he didn't come to save himself, he came to save the world. And so he endured. He took every insult, every lash, every nail. He didn't fight back, he didn't defend himself. He fulfilled his purpose, and because he endured, because he didn't quit, he walked out of the grave in power. That's what happens when you refuse to let opposition break you, when you stand firm, when you don't waver, when you stay obedient no matter what comes against you. Resurrection follows. What looked like defeat turns into victory. What seemed like the end becomes a new beginning. So don't run from the battle. Don't shrink back when people come against you. If Jesus had to endure opposition, so will you. But if you hold on, if you keep your eyes on the mission, if you refuse to quit, you won't just survive the attack, you will come out stronger, more anointed, and completely unstoppable. Jesus never lost sight of his mission. From the very beginning, he understood why he was sent, what he was called to do, and what it would cost him. He didn't allow distractions to pull him away, didn't let opposition break his focus, and didn't let the opinions of people alter his direction. He was locked in, determined, completely surrendered to the will of the Father. And that's why he finished what he started. That's where so many people fall short. They begin with passion, with excitement, with energy, but when challenges come, when delays happen, when the road gets tough, they start to waver. They allow discouragement to creep in. They start questioning whether they heard God correctly. They lose momentum. But Jesus never wavered. He never allowed the weight of the journey to shake his commitment. Even when people walked away, even when his closest disciples failed him, even when he faced betrayal, he kept moving forward. There was a moment when Jesus set his eyes toward Jerusalem, knowing what awaited him there. He knew the suffering that was coming. He knew the betrayal, the pain, the cross, and yet he didn't hesitate. He didn't turn back. He walked straight into his destiny because he was not here to be comfortable. He was here to complete what he was sent to do. Most people want the blessing without the endurance. They want the reward without the perseverance. But anything worth having, anything God has called you to, will require you to finish. The enemy knows he cannot stop what God has put inside of you. So his strategy is to wear you down, to make you quit, to make you question whether it's even worth it. But quitting is not an option when you understand that your life is part of something greater. Jesus understood that his mission was bigger than him. It wasn't just about what he felt in the moment. It wasn't about temporary pain. It was about eternity. He endured because he saw beyond the suffering. He saw the joy that was set before him. He saw salvation. He saw redemption. He saw victory. That's what kept him going, and that's what must keep you going. Some of you started something that God placed in your heart, but the process has been harder than you expected. You thought doors would open quickly. You thought people would support you. You thought the journey would be smooth, but instead, it's been a fight, and now you're wondering if you should just let it go. You're wondering if you misheard God, but hear this. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not God. Just because it's taking time doesn't mean it's not meant to be. Jesus had to endure before he could complete his assignment, and so will you. People mocked him as he carried that cross. They insulted him. They challenged him to prove himself. They told him to come down and save himself, but he didn't. because he knew that temporary relief was not worth sacrificing eternal purpose. He knew that the pain of the moment was nothing compared to the glory that was coming, so he stayed on that cross. He finished what he came to do, and when it was done, he declared, "It is finished." That is the declaration of victory. That is the mark of a champion, not someone who starts strong, but someone who finishes, someone who doesn't give up when it gets hard, someone who doesn't quit when the enemy attacks, someone who refuses to let anything stop them from completing what God has called them to do. So ask yourself, are you willing to finish? Are you willing to endure, to push through, to stay the course no matter what comes against you? Because if Jesus could carry his cross to completion, if he could suffer and still win, then so can you. You were never called to start and quit. You were never meant to stop halfway. You were created to finish strong. And when you do, you will look back and see that every struggle, every delay, every moment of pain was worth it, because the victory that follows will be greater than anything you can imagine. Jesus didn't just come to live. He came to leave something behind. He came to impart, to equip, to empower. He wasn't just focused on his own journey. He was focused on what would happen after he was gone. Every step he took, every word he spoke, every lesson he taught was preparing those around him for something greater. He wasn't just building for the present. He was setting the foundation for the future. That's the difference between people who make an impact and people who simply pass through life. Some people live for themselves, chasing their own success, their own comfort, their own goals. But the ones who truly change the world are the ones who understand that their purpose is bigger than them. Jesus didn't just perform miracles, he trained others to do the same. He didn't just carry power, he transferred it. He didn't just fulfill his mission, he made sure that when he left, his mission would continue. He took ordinary men, fishermen, tax collectors, people that society overlooked, and he poured into them. He trained them, challenged them, corrected them. He didn't just give them knowledge, he gave them authority. And by the time he ascended to heaven, they weren't the same men they were when he first called them. They were transformed, equipped, ready to carry out the assignment he had entrusted to them. That's the kind of life you are called to live. A life that doesn't just end with you, but a life that keeps going long after you're gone. A life that leaves an impact, that raises others up, that multiplies what God has placed inside of you. Because if what you're building ends with you, then you're thinking too small. If your vision is only about your own success, your own achievements, your own breakthrough, then you've missed the point. The true measure of a life well lived is not just what you accomplish, it's what you leave behind. Jesus said, "The works that I do, you will do also, and greater works than these will you do." Think about that. The same Jesus who walked on water, who healed the sick, who raised the dead, looked at his disciples and said, "You will do even greater." That's legacy. That's impact. That's what happens when you pour into others, when you don't just live for yourself, but invest in those who come after you. But here's the problem. Too many people hold on to what they've been given instead of passing it on. They're afraid to share what they know, afraid to raise others up, afraid to release what's inside of them because they think it will take something away from them. But that's not how the kingdom works. In the kingdom, the more you give, the more you receive. The more you pour out, the more God pours into you. The more you release, the greater your impact becomes. Jesus knew his time on earth was limited, so he made every moment count. He didn't waste time with distractions. He didn't keep his power to himself. He made sure that when he left, his disciples wouldn't be lost. They would be ready. He spent time with them, shared his heart with them, revealed secrets of the kingdom to them. He didn't just speak to the crowds. He invested in those who would carry the message after he was gone. And because of that, his influence didn't die with him. It exploded. It spread across nations, across generations, across centuries. That's the kind of life you're called to live. A life that multiplies, that outlives you, that carries impact beyond your own years. So the question is, who are you pouring into? Who are you equipping? Who are you raising up? Because if you're only focused on your own journey, You're missing the bigger picture. Jesus didn't just train to be great, He trained to make others great. And that's why His impact is still shaking the world today. So don't just think about what you're achieving, think about what you're leaving. Because real power is not in what you hold, it's in what you pass on. And when you live like that, your impact will never end.